Imagine being a hero who fights bravely to do what's right, only to discover that, unknowingly, you've fulfilled the darkest destiny of all. This is the story of Oedipus, one of the most tragic characters in Greek mythology. But is he really guilty of his actions? Or was he merely a puppet in the hands of forces far greater than himself? Often, we're quick to judge what is right and what is wrong, but what if the rules of the game were against you from the very start? What if, no matter how hard you tried, your fate was already sealed, laughing at your attempts to escape? The psychology behind Oedipus's actions leads us to question not only the nature of fate, but also the concept of guilt and responsibility. Could he have avoided the disaster that befell his life in Thebes? Or are we all, in some way, victims of circumstances beyond our control? This is where Oedipus's story touches our own lives. How many times have we felt guilty for something that seemed inevitable? How many times have we fought against forces we couldn't understand? Get ready for an exploration that will shake your certainties and challenge your convictions. Let's dive deep into Oedipus's mind and uncover whether he was truly the villain of his own story or merely a victim of a perverse cosmic game. And in doing so, let's also take a look at ourselves, because who hasn't questioned their own choices and the role of fate in their lives? The Oracle of Delphi was more than just a place. It was the nerve center of communication between mortals and deities in ancient Greece. Imagine yourself standing before the sanctuary, the air filled with mystery and power. People from all over the world came there seeking answers, omens about the future. Delphi was not just a simple place of worship. It was like the Google of ancient times, where queries were directed to the gods to guide decisions, from simple daily matters to military strategies. That giant serpent, slain by Apollo, was just the beginning of the legacy that would transform Delphi into a place of reverence and power. When Apollo defeated the giant serpent, the Pythia, the temple's priestess, became the voice of the gods, uttering enigmatic prophecies that could change the fate of kings and heroes. Imagine the feeling of knowing that a single phrase she spoke could turn the tide of a battle or determine the fate of an entire city. It was like standing before a puzzle, where every word held a hidden meaning, waiting to be unraveled. This is how great mysteries are, complex and often ironic, leading us to understand that control over our destiny may be more illusory than real. The sanctuary of Delphi became a symbol of human uncertainty in the face of destiny and the forces we cannot control. Think of it as a metaphor for modern life. We all seek signs, directions, something to tell us if we're on the right path, don't we? Just like the ancient Greeks, we want clear answers, but sometimes the answers come in unexpected forms, challenging our understanding. And so, between one prophecy and another, we draw closer to the birth of Oedipus, where fate begins to lay out its darkest plans. Oedipus's story begins with a dark omen that shook the foundations of the kingdom of Thebes. Imagine a king hearing from an oracle that his own son would be his downfall, a notion that transforms paternal love into fear. Laius, the king of Thebes, found himself trapped in a psychological snare, where each step seemed to lead him closer to his inevitable fate. He tried everything to escape this prophecy, but that's where life's irony reveals itself. The more we try to flee from destiny, the more it entangles us in its web. Laius and Jocasta decided to take drastic measures, believing they could outsmart fate by getting rid of their newborn son. But can we truly control the forces that shape our paths? It's curious how this story repeats itself in our lives. How many times have we tried to avoid something only to end up exactly where we didn't want to be? This moment in Oedipus's life is a reminder that, no matter how much we wish to change the course of things, destiny has a peculiar way of finding us. Thus, despite all efforts to avert tragedy, the prophecy was only beginning to take shape. The decision to abandon the infant Oedipus wasn't the end, but the start of a chain of events that no one could foresee. While the young prince's life was at the mercy of the winds of chance, a new chapter was being written, leading us directly to the next episode, the exposure and rescue of Oedipus. When little Oedipus was left to die on the slopes of a mountain, it seemed his fate was sealed. His parents, Laius and Jocasta, believed they were doing what was necessary to protect themselves and the kingdom of Thebes. However, destiny had other plans. A servant, moved by a compassion that transcended any royal command, couldn't bring himself to abandon the child to his fate. It's curious how human kindness, in its simplest moments, can completely alter the course of a story. Rescued by a shepherd passing through the area, Oedipus was taken far from Thebes and eventually delivered to a noble couple in Corinth, who raised him as their own son. Here, we see an interesting twist. The boy destined to live an epic tragedy began his life in a home filled with love and privilege. How often in our lives are we surprised by the kindness of strangers who, unknowingly, set our destiny back on track? It's as if the universe sends signals that, even in the darkest situations, there is always a light of hope. As Oedipus grew up, unaware of his true origins, destiny continued to weave its intricate web. He believed himself to be the legitimate son of the king and queen of Corinth, living a life that seemed far removed from the shadows of prophecies and tragedies. However, his quest for the truth was about to begin, and little did he know that this journey would lead him to discover a reality far more terrifying than any prophecy could have predicted. Over time, Oedipus began to question his origins, driven by rumors and doubts that surrounded him in Corinth. It's not easy living with the feeling that something doesn't add up, and this unease led him to seek answers at the Oracle of Delphi. Imagine the weight of hearing a prophecy that told him he was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. It's the kind of revelation that makes the ground disappear beneath your feet, leaving only an abyss of uncertainties. Determined to avoid this terrible fate, Oedipus decided not to return to Corinth, believing that by staying away, he would be protecting those he considered his parents. But no matter how hard he tried to escape his fate, he was, in fact, walking straight toward it. It makes us think about how often our decisions, driven by fear, end up leading us exactly to what we most dread. It's like trying to escape a shadow that, no matter which direction we take, always follows us. As he took a new path, Oedipus was unaware that he was getting closer and closer to his true family and his inevitable destiny. In his quest for the truth, he was preparing to face a series of events that would seal his future in a tragic way. The fatal encounter was near, and Oedipus, without realizing it, was heading toward a trap that destiny had prepared with cruel precision. Oedipus's meeting with his father, Laius, at a crossroads was a moment that seemed to be marked by the gods themselves. Without knowing who stood before him, Oedipus got involved in a quarrel that quickly turned into a violent confrontation. The irony of fate is that in his attempt to escape the dark prophecy, he inadvertently fulfilled it. It was as if the universe was mocking human attempts to change what is predestined. This crucial moment shows us how often the choices we make in the heat of the moment can have consequences we never even imagined. On that dusty road, in an impulse of self-defense and pride, Oedipus killed Laius, not knowing he had fulfilled the first part of the terrible prophecy. Isn't it curious how life seems to have a strange way of pushing us exactly where we don't want to go, regardless of our efforts? But fate still had secrets in store for Oedipus, and his journey was far from over. He believed he had merely defended his honor, but in reality, he had taken the first step toward the complete tragedy that was to come. Unknowingly, he was heading toward Thebes, where he would solve a riddle and find a new home, and a new cycle of events that would forever transform his life. Upon arriving in Thebes, Oedipus found a city terrorized by a creature that no one could defeat, the Sphinx. With its enigmatic riddle, it devoured all who failed to answer correctly. But Oedipus, with his sharp intellect and desire to prove his worth, faced the Sphinx and solved the mystery that had so tormented the people of Thebes. It was at this moment that he became a hero, the savior who freed the city from its greatest nightmare, earning the admiration and respect of all. As a reward for his deeds, Oedipus was crowned as the king of Thebes and, unaware of the truth, married Jocasta, the widow of the former king, who was, in fact, his own mother. This turn of events is a powerful reminder of how sometimes our greatest victories can also be the beginning of our deepest falls. It's curious to think that in that moment of glory, Oedipus was simultaneously sealing his tragic fate without the slightest idea. And so, in his role as leader and protector of Thebes, Oedipus believed he had secured a place of peace and safety for himself and the people. But behind this triumph, the dark secrets continued to lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Fate, as always, was merely waiting to show the true face of its prophecy when a devastating plague would descend upon the city, triggering a new quest for the truth. The joy of Thebes soon turned into despair when a terrible plague struck the city, bringing death and suffering to all its inhabitants. As a leader concerned for his people, Oedipus found himself forced to seek a solution. He consulted the oracle and discovered that the only way to end the plague was to find and punish the murderer of the former king. It's ironic how, in this moment of pursuit for justice, he was closer to the truth than he could have ever imagined. Driven by his sense of duty and justice, Oedipus began an investigation to uncover the culprit's identity. He didn't know that each question he asked was leading him closer to a devastating revelation. How often, in our search for answers, do we end up discovering things we would rather not know? It's like opening a Pandora's box, where, once revealed, the secrets can no longer be ignored. The clues were all around him, yet he remained blind to the truth that was approaching. As the details unfolded, Oedipus began to realize that the truth was not just dark, but cruelly ironic. He was the very murderer he was looking for, the cause of the suffering he was desperately trying to alleviate. And so, reality began to reveal itself, one layer at a time, pushing Oedipus into a spiral of despair that would culminate in a tragedy no hero could avoid. When the truth finally came to light, it was as if a dark veil fell over Oedipus and everyone around him. Jocasta, devastated by the revelation that she had married her own son, couldn't bear the weight of the truth and took her own life. This desperate act was like a reflection of the suffering that consumed every corner of Oedipus's life. It's hard to imagine how someone can cope with the reality that, unknowingly, they fulfilled such a cruel prophecy. Upon discovering the full extent of his actions, Oedipus found no other way out but to punish himself in the most brutal way possible. He blinded himself, tearing out the very sight that, until then, had been incapable of seeing the truth that was always before him. This act of self-flagellation was not just a response to despair, but also an attempt to control what remained of his fate, even if it was through pain. It was as if he sought some form of justice, no matter how bitter, for the wrongs he didn't even know he had committed. Blind and exiled, Oedipus left Thebes, a shadow of the man he once was. His journey was now one of introspection and penance, an eternal wandering in search of peace for a soul torn apart by fate. And so, even in the face of the bitterest reality, the question that echoes beyond time remains. Could Oedipus truly be guilty of acts that were beyond his control? It is in this dilemma between guilt and innocence that we conclude our tragedy, only to open the door to a deeper reflection on the true weight of choices and the influence of fate in our lives. Now that you have delved into Oedipus's mind and reflected on the fine line between guilt and destiny, the question remains. To what extent do you really control your choices? Are the events of your life in your hands, or are you also caught in the gears of something greater? If Oedipus taught us anything, it's that the search for truth can be painful, but it is also liberating. So, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue to let circumstances decide for you, or are you ready to take the reins of your own destiny? It's not just about Oedipus. It's about how each of us deals with our own dilemmas and conflicts. What would you do differently if you knew that everything you do has a much greater impact than you imagine? Think about it. And if these reflections made you question, if they truly made you think, then you've already taken the first step towards something great. And to continue exploring these deep questions about mythology, psychology, and what truly drives human actions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any content that could transform the way you see the world, and perhaps how you see yourself.